The first known church in Tullibody in Clackmannanshire was built by royal charter in 1149 and dedicated to St Mungo, although nothing remains of it. David I of Scotland granted certain lands around Tullibody, including its inches in the River Forth, to Cambuskenneth Abbey near Stirling, which had been built 2 years previously. The granting of the new church was confirmed by Lawrence, the first bishop of Dunblane, and later by Pope Innocent in Rome. In 1297 he wrote to his beloved children, the abbot and canons of St Mary at Cambuskenneth, stating, "I confirm the grant of the church of Tullibody with all its possessions and pertinence." Meanwhile, one of the king's stipulations was that the kirk in the village was to be subordinate to Cambuskenneth. It was said that the foundation stone was laid on soil brought back from Jerusalem by crusaders, but whether this is true or not has been lost in the mists of time. For around 400 years, Catholic worship took place at the site, but in 1538, the last priest at Tullibody, Thomas Lucklaw, decided to leave the Catholic faith and fled to England. This was the same century the little church was constructed, with a record of the Auld Kirk first being made at this time. Rectangular in shape, measuring 63 feet 1 inch and 22 feet 3 inches, and built from a mix of ashlar and rubble, the Crowstep gable walls date to around this time. On the south wall, there are 2 moulded doorways, also dating from the 16th century, with the easterly door having the date 1539 inscribed on it, along with a pastoral staff. To the north there is evidence of a small window, but this has been blocked in. In 1559, the Catholic French army of Mary of Guise, Queen Regent and mother of Mary Queen of Scots, destroyed the building. Under the command of Henri Clutin, Monsieur Doisel, the French were retreating to Stirling, having received word in Fife that the English navy had been spotted in the Firth of Forth. The troops used the timber from the church to repair a bridge over the River Devon at Bridge End, roughly a mile to the west of the village. One of the arches of the old bridge had been demolished by William Kirkcaldy of Grange to hinder them reaching a ship at Leith, and the wood from the church's roof covered this breach. The act would not have been carried out if the church had still been a place of Catholic worship. Therefore, by this time, it was evidently leaning towards Protestantism. John Knox, the famous Protestant preacher, later wrote of the incident, stating, "The French, experts enough in such feats, took down the roof of a parish kirk and made one bridge over the water called Devon, and so they escaped and went to Stirling, and thereafter to death." Although the roof was repaired shortly afterwards, the church itself fell into disrepair due to it losing its parish status around 1600, when Alloa became a separate parish. In 1579, the parishioners, amounting to somewhere between 400 and 500, supported the ordination of a new minister, Alexander Forgy, by the Presbytery of Stirling. He only lasted a year at Tullibody. The church became a ruin, with only its gable ends standing at the beginning of the 18th century. In 1760, George Abercrombie, father of Sir Ralph Abercrombie, restored it. It was altered and re-roofed with blue tiles, and Abercrombie added a bellcote with an ogee top at the western end, and an old man-of-war ship's bell was presented to the parish by Sir Ralph Abercrombie. Alexander Fairley had the belfry built for the bell donated by him. This bell had the inscription Duke of Kingston, 1756, but in 1837 it cracked and was replaced by the Tullibody bell, which has the inscription Tullibody, 1838. The roof was redone in 1824 with flagstones. It was further restored in 1833 with an entrance porch and pews being added. Church services began to be held there regularly until the time of the disruption in 1843. This was when the established church was torn apart by the Free Presbyterian movement. Tullibody Auld Kirk suffered like many other churches in Scotland, as its congregation was split. However, most came out with the minister's assistant, Mr. Stevenson, who was ordained as the first minister of the Free Church of Scotland in the grounds of the old church. After this, there were only occasional services at Tullibody until March 1879, when regular fortnightly services were implemented by the minister, and Holy Communion took place twice a year. Less than a century later, it was abandoned for the final time. In 1904, it was deemed unsafe, and the new parish church of St. Serph next to it was opened on 23rd April that same year. In 1916, the roof of the old church was removed. Inside the remains is an ornate 17th century monument to the local laird, George Abercrombie, set with Corinthian columns and a pediment that is decorated with his coat of arms. He died in 1699, and the cemetery surrounding it became the burial place of the Abercrombie family for the next few centuries. The re-roofing of the church in 1824 was done to protect this headstone. On the south wall of the building is a memorial tablet to Robert Anderson, a former merchant at St. Lucar, who had been born in Tullibody. He died in 1712, and in his will bequeathed £50 to the poor of the village, as well as £50 to the poor of Alloa. The monument had been erected by his nephew, Richard Main, who inherited his estate. In 1758, a stone wall was erected at a cost of just over £35. Coping stones were added in 1760. George Abercrombie also thought the addition of trees inside the wall would enhance the surroundings, but the sexton, Robert Mason, disagreed. So much so, he pulled the newly planted trees out by their roots. Angered by this action, Abercrombie replanted them. Mason pulled them out once more. The sexton was then imprisoned in Clackmannanshire jail for his actions for a short time, and when he returned, new trees had been planted. This time, instead of pulling them out, he poured boiling water over them. Eventually, trees were planted, out with the kirkyard. Among the old tombstones in the graveyard is the stone coffin of Martha Wishart, otherwise known as the Martin Maid. Legend states she fell pregnant to the local priest, Peter Beaton, who abandoned her. She died before giving birth to her child, but wanted to remind him of the ill he had done to her by having her coffin by the entrance of the church. Among the other graves of note is the man who Robert Dick, the baker, botanist and geologist, had learned his craft from as a youngster, William Aikman. Also buried within the graveyard is the son of Sir James Young Simpson, the eminent Victorian obstetrician. Although the family vault is in Edinburgh, Magnus Simpson, his son, had visited the area to help his health and asked to be buried in the kirkyard after he saw its location. Following his death, he was initially buried in the family vault, but later his wishes were carried out and he was buried at Tullibody. The new cemetery, adjoining this one, was opened in 1905, as it by this time was full, with the first burial taking place in this new cemetery in July 1907. One last place of note is the priest's well. Lying near the place where the former manse stood before its demolition during the Reformation, this would have been where the fresh water would have been collected. Eventually it was condemned as unfit for human consumption, and a stone covers it dated 1905, stating, "Site of the old priest's well."